All right, Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. It's been a while since we've had a conversation here on the show, and I thought, hey, instead of relegating this chat, or this topic rather, to an episode rather of the Vuganazo show, which is our daily short format show, how about I actually have a proper discussion on this topic? And that is, of course, the issue playing out between Russia and the Ukraine. We've had these conversations before in the past, indeed, on Liberty and Friends. I'll put a link in the descriptor to that episode. I think we did it quite a few months ago. But how about we have a refresher on that? But hey, before any of that, where are my manners? My name, of course, is Usihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. You're watching the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Do me a favor, we're watching this broadcast on Facebook, YouTube, or on Twitter. Hit the like button. You see, this is what happens when you haven't been on there for a while. You lose that smoothness. But nonetheless, hit that like button, please, whether you're watching on any of those avenues. And if you are watching on YouTube in particular, then subscribe to the channel. Please do yourself a favor. Hit that subscribe button and, of course, the bell notification so that you're notified every time we have a show. And a reminder to you folks, we have a website. Find us at bigdaddyliberty.com. Now, with that jibber jabber out the way, let me bring my host, see what happens, as I said, let me bring my guest on tonight's show. He'll help us unpack the issue of the Ukraine-Russia war, but more specifically, the latest on this, where that delegation of African countries went to present what they termed a 10-point peace plan to both the leaders of the Ukraine, Zelensky, of course, who Mr. I never wear a suit, I'm always in green fatigues, and of course, the longtime leader of the Russian Federation, Putin, that's Vladimir Putin. Very interesting responses from both of these leaders, but don't hear it from me, don't let me waffle, let me bring on my guest, as I said. There he is on screen, Hugo Kruger. Hugo, hello.
Hi, Sikli, how are you doing?
Brother, good to have you on the show. And indeed, I want to unpack this topic for those viewers who maybe have forgotten the historical context of this issue because they're caught up, of course, in the current affairs nature of this issue. Before we do any of that,
so you want a short history recent on Russian-Ukrainian relations. It's basically two mafias fighting each other. That's it.
I was about to say, and I knew you were going to hit me with that one. Because effectively, when we had this conversation last time, Hugo, you effectively said that quite openly. You said, let me paraphrase your point. First of all, this conflict between these two nations goes back a very, very long way. It isn't just a recent conflict as the mainstream media will have us believe. It has, of course, regional implications. I remember you using the example of, this would be a conflict between arguably just the random example, if memory serves me right, between Zimbabwe and South Africa over arguably Swaziland and Lesotho. There's actual regions involved, if I remember your example roughly. And I'll have you speak to that again in a moment. But let's speak to maybe that history. Actually, yeah, let's begin there.
Okay, so I'll quickly recap on the history. The history of Russia-Ukraine obviously goes back centuries. The Russian Empire started in Kiev, if you want to go far back, but I don't think you have to. I think most people would say, so I go far and I say, let's start at the 1990s, for example. 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States sent a little bit of guys called Harvard boys there to deregulate their infrastructure. It was no such thing. There was a systemic sabotage. Russian infrastructure collapsed. Life expectancy dropped by 30 years, and in the 2000s, and some women were sold into prostitution. So already the Russians were not very happy about how they were treated as a defeated power. They were humiliated in a similar way to what Germany was humiliated after the Treaty of Versailles. So that already hardened the Russian attitude towards the West. Okay, things were fine and everything. Yeltsin was out. Putin basically came to power in the backdrop of this humiliation. But Putin opened up to the West initially. He was not anti-Western. He's been the most pro-Russian leader in a very long time, until recently. Then you've got Ukraine there. There's always been historical context. So it's the close I can explain it is Scotland and England, basically. The Scottish are British, but they're not English, basically. And the Ukrainians were very similar. They have big historical ties with Russia, but there's a part of Ukraine that's always had felt that they were a little bit oppressed by the Russians during the Russian Empire and during the Soviet Union because they were colonized by Russia. But the way Russia colonized historically is it would put its populations on the edge as a buffer, right? It's civilian populations because Russia's always have been invaded from the European plains. So it's been destroyed numerous times throughout its history. In particular, the armies of Hitler and Napoleon came through. Well, Napoleon came through Belarus, actually, and Hitler came through Ukraine. Okay, that is a very important historical context. You need to take long-term history into account because that speaks to the psychology of a nation. Nationalism is real. I don't care what people tell me, okay? The same for Ukraine. The Ukrainians don't like if the Russians say you're Ukrainian, okay? Or the Russians tell them you're actually Russian with the same people. So we also have our own little place in the sun, you know. So already that's always historically been there, but actually there's been a lot of cooperation between them as well. They, for example, the space program for Russia, many of those things were in Kiev, right? So they shot rockets before this war. Ukrainian, Russian scientists with Americans shot rockets to the moon. So don't pretend they were always fighting. Like all people, they, you know, you sometimes move your family, sometimes like your family, and that's sort of what it, what the thing was about. Then where the trouble started during after the Second World War, when the Stalin basically took up most of your Eastern Europe, whatever. The CIA started funding infiltration in Ukraine, which were Nazis. Okay, because why the Ukrainian Nazis fought on the side of Hitler. And there's a particular hero by the name of Stepan Bandera, who was a Ukrainian Nazi supporter. Now, again, as for Nazi in Ukraine, some people have warned me to not make a very strong comparison. I'm going to defend Nazis, which sound very strange for a moment. But, you know, you always have that thing where I know my hero was bad and stuff, but I still like him. Like many Russians who like Stalin. You know, you still have that today. So they still think Stalin was a good guy, even though he killed, I don't know how many million people. So, you find a thing like if you talk among Ukrainians, they'll say, yeah, that guy was a bit of a bossel. But, anyway, so that is one of part of the history. So there's a lot of historical conflicts between them. Let's start there. Then let's start with the modern history of what we about is 2014. CIA tries to instigate a coup d'etat. They did instigate a coup d'etat, okay, in Ukraine. Victoria Nuland had a phone call with Anthony Blinken. She said, what is it, the FU phone call, for example? If the EU, because she was handpicking the Ukrainian government. So now you're instigating a coup d'etat on the border of Russia, okay, where Russia was invaded by Hitler. Given all that history we just talked about, you're looking for trouble. And they were looking for trouble. They were provoking. Okay, John McCain and Lindsey Graham, the two geniuses, were there, and they went and they spoke to Ukrainian Nazi militias, and they said to them, "We promise you congressional support if you guys go on the offensive." Okay, now why does the media say it's an unprovoked aggression? Unprovoked. You've heard that. Unprovoked. Why? Because they bloody well know it's provoked. They provoked a conflict with Russia. Why? Zbigniew Brzezinski did the exact same thing in 1979 when the United States, I think 1979 was off. No, it must be before. Anyway, it was in Jimmy Carter's era. Jimmy Carter, Secretary of State, to basically fund the Mujahideen, which became the Taliban in Afghanistan, to draw the Russians into a war so they can provoke them into a war. And that's the war that probably sank the Soviet Union. Okay, so there's great power geopolitics at play all over here. Then let's throw a few punches to the Russians, because they're also not innocent in this. As opposed to trying to settle this conflict with the Ukrainians, they started funding military groups in the Donbas area, which is a Russian-speaking area of the Ukraine. Okay, so you're seeing escalation, and then all of a sudden Putin snaps and there's an invasion. And that is the historical context here. So how do you resolve a conflict like that? Well, two guys who fought each other have to admit that they're both part of the problem.
Hang on, Hugo. We're going to have a flow here. And I think that pretext that you set out is very important because, as I said, a lot of people forget this context because we're so immersed in the current affairs nature of the conflict that there are many moving variables and multiple things can be true at once also, because people tend to forget that. People love...
So I want to make a point here, which you say there, which is it's a point I was giving to Dr. Richard Sakwa, who is the world expert in Russian-Ukrainian relations. He was on my channel, and I can get you here as well. If you're not prepared to see the other guy's point of view, in a empathetic base, not in a way that I agree with her, just to understand from strategic empathy, you're automatically endorsing the language of war. So whether you support Russia or Ukraine, I don't care. You need to see the point of view of both sides before you can find a resolution to the conflict. And then I just want to add here, there's another conflict here. There's an international order that was established since Helsinki, since the Nuremberg trials. Unprovoked aggression is a supreme crime. That is invasion. And that's what Putin is now going to be held accountable by international law. But the problem with that thing is it's not being applied equally because the United States invaded Iraq and Libya. Okay, thank you.
No, you're absolutely spot on. And as my son comes back there, and I was about to make that exact point, and I must say this, because I know it's going to happen in the comment section. Guys, I don't care what side you're on. Whether you're the pro-Russia, pro-Ukraine, I don't give a flying fudge. For me, it's the analysis of what we're seeing that's very important in this moment. And that's what we'll have a conversation about, because the African contingent has now tried to insert itself into this particular conflict because they're feeling, of course, the economic headwinds of the conflict. So this is where I pick up tonight's conversation with Hugo Kruger. Make sure you check out his personal channel. I'll leave a link of that in, of course, the descriptor of the video. Let me just open this up. Cyril Ramaphosa leads a delegation of African leaders to the Ukraine and, of course, Russia. Now, I'll leave aside the shenanigans of his one plane with the security contingent being stuck in Poland. I'll tackle that issue in a Vugat Nazo episode, but rather, let me put this on screen. Hugo, just bear with me, please, as I put this on screen, because I want people to understand what exactly was in that 10-point plan, and we'll have a conversation about it. There it is on screen. I draw this, of course, from the Daily Maverick, who wrote a piece on this. You see right there, so Ramaphosa and Putin looking rather chuffed to meet each other. They're big smiles all around. And as I said, the heads of state of the Comoros, Zambia, and Senegal were part of the African delegation that initiated peace talks along with South Africa, meeting first Zelensky in Kiev, followed by Putin, in St. Petersburg. Now, here's where it got interesting. Some African countries actually pulled out of this particular delegation, Egypt, Congo, and Uganda, pulling out at the last minute. So let's, for a moment, park that and look at the actual 10-point plan that was put forward. What did it say? Well, it outlined the following. It says both leaders, let me just make this bigger so people can see. There we go. Both leaders must listen to one another. Okay. The war must be settled through negotiations and diplomatic means. There must be a de-escalation of conflict on both sides. The sovereignty of countries in terms of the UN Charter and internationally recognized principles should be recognized. We'll come back to that, Hugo, in a moment. There needs to be a guarantee of security for all the countries involved. This issue has been raised on all sides. The movement of grains across the Black Sea must be opened up to remove blockages so that commodities can reach markets. Humanitarian efforts must be set up for those affected by the war. Prisoners of war must be released and children returned to Ukraine. We'll get to that also in a moment, Hugo, because that's the basis of those charges by the International Criminals Court. There must be reconstruction of the destruction caused by the war. And lastly, further engagements should be held to encourage more dialogue through the Africa Peace Mission. End of quote. Now, Hugo, just give me a second here, because as I said, this peace plan was presented both to Zelensky in the Ukraine and, of course, to Putin. Zelensky himself later coming out, especially also through his ambassador, here in South Africa, endorsing the plan, thumbs up. Seemingly, therefore, you would assume that the plan is more pro-Ukraine in its nature. They are very happy with this. Hugo, I'll let you in a moment, because I want to play this video of the response by the Russians. This is President Putin, as the African delegation was presenting this plan, basically saying two things. Number one, the African delegation, as he puts it, simply does not have a grasp on the issues, and there are certain red lines that he has. And number two, Putin himself saying there already is a peace plan that Kiev, or that is the Ukrainians, are simply not honored. These are his words speaking to the African delegation, interrupting, indeed lecturing, as I put it in the heading, the African delegation.
Yeah, so let me
just a moment.
Насильник, да, не отказывался от переговоров. Вот хочу обратить ваше внимание на то, что при содействии того же президента Эрдогана, как вы знаете, в Турции прошла целая серия переговоров между Россией и Украиной по выработке и мер доверия, о которых вы сказали, и по подготовке самого текста договора. Этот договор, мы не договаривались с украинской стороной, что он будет носить конфиденциальный характер. Но мы никогда его не предъявляли, не комментировали. Этот проект этого договора был парафирован руководителем переговорной группы из Киева. Он поставил там свою подпись. Вот он. Он есть. Он так и называется. Договор о постоянном нейтралитете и гарантиях безопасности Украины. Именно о гарантиях, о которых вы сказали, уважаемый друг, президент Южноафриканской Республики. 18 статей. Более того, к нему есть еще и приложение. Они, знаете, сейчас даже не буду об этом говорить, они касаются и вооруженных сил, касаются других вещей. Все прописано до единиц боевой техники и до личного состава вооруженных сил. Вот этот документ. Он парафирован киевской делегацией. Подпись стоит. Но после того, как мы, как и обещали, отвели войска от Киева, киевские власти, как обычно, делают их хозяева, выбросили это все на свалку истории. Скажем так, аккуратно и постараюсь интеллигентно выражать.
Wow. Tough negotiator.
Hugo, before I let you in, there's three things I want you to touch on. From the peace plan to Putin's comments that we just listened to here, a deep sense of betrayal. You can hear Putin's tone, effectively, saying, hey, we've never been opposed to peace. Indeed, we negotiated a treaty of sorts, pardon me, a peace treaty in Turkey. That's what he's referring to in that. And those 18 provisions in it, we kept our side, as he's suggesting. It was Kiev or Zelensky's Ukraine that didn't keep their side. Hugo, your first comment on that?
Well, it's not the first time, because also there was the Minsk II protocol, which Russia signed, which every European power signed. America sort of gave a yes for it, and they never put pressure on Ukraine to implement it. You see, this is the part of this whole thing. Okay, there's been the Istanbul Declaration. Is now this whole thing. It's another process. It's basically saying the same thing that the Minsk II Accord said in 2015. This war would not have happened had we implemented the existing peace treaty. I said it in the beginning as this war broke out. You remember that. This is the exact same proposal. So Putin is correct there. Okay, I don't like defending the guy. Here's the big issue in this whole issue. Okay, I'm going to rephrase again what Noam Chomsky told me. The war will not end unless America joins the peace process. Okay, because the United States must put pressure on Ukraine to negotiate. I know it's tough. You don't like seeing 100,000 of your countrymen dead and you want to keep on fighting. I get that. But we are sending Ukrainian kids to a meat grinder at this stage. And they're all as you and me, a little bit younger than us. They could have been a young intern in our office right now. Okay, I have a friend from Russia. My wife's got friends who is associated with Russian Orthodox Church in Paris. The most liveliest people you've ever seen before this war broke out. They've kept quiet because their family are being mobilized. Many of them are intermarried with Ukrainians. Okay, I had a friend who, when Putin, the next Crimea, it was the end of the relationship with him and his girlfriend because the families couldn't get along. It's family stuff that's being destroyed. This is not just one side fighting the other. So bring an end to the conflict and help the Ukrainians as much as you can. They are brave people for fighting, standing up for their country. I respect them for that. All of those things. But you need to come to a point where you say, I don't want to send more young kids to die. Okay. And more young Russians as well, because, this is a strategy of war. When a country mobilizes for war, it mobilizes the capacity of the state. It affects all aspects of society. This is why Eisenhower warned about the military industrial state. It's, the propaganda becomes internalized. Everyone becomes an agent for propaganda. Everyone wants to provoke and up the tensions, and it's just escalation, escalation, escalation. Where we're heading with this type of language, we're heading to the First World War. That is where we're going, okay? And the First World War killed the flower of the British youth. Okay, the British Empire collapsed basically because of the First World War, because they sent too many kids to their grave. And we're talking here about great power conflicts. People tend to forget Russia has nuclear weapons. Do you really want to provoke? You saw Putin; he was very close to snapping there. Do you want him to snap with nuclear weapons? Okay, that's what we're forcing. Don't put pressure on a negotiation. Try and pay pressure off. So you can bring him to the table, you can calm him. And to do that, you must give him an assurance. So send a CIA director, who is William Burns, one of America's top diplomats. He knows what he's doing. He's worked in Russia. He speaks fluent Russian. Send them to Vladimir Putin, and you say to Mr. Burns, and he's been saying it since the war, they blocked the CIA even. So the US administration is so crazy, they don't even listen to their own intelligence agencies at this stage. Just go and say, send the CIA and negotiate, okay? Israel was prepared to do it with Bennett before Netanyahu. They were talking. Why? Because I think 20 or 30% of Israelis are Russian Jews, right? So they have an interest not to fight Americans as well. So you're putting every population that has got a geopolitical interest of Russia, which is most people in the world, Africa gets grain from them, all those things, under pressure. And that is a very dangerous situation that we're heading towards. That's why everyone got a little bit more tense throughout the war when this war broke out, because we all depend on all these countries and we need them to cooperate. And that's what I want to do. So I congratulate Ramaphosa for going there. I think I don't always like what he's doing at home, but for the African leaders to try, it's a very good thing. But they must try and bring the Americans to the Russians. And at this stage, that is not happening. And that's how it can de-escalate. And then also in Ukraine, you have to call it out. There's an ugly form of Ukrainian nationalism, which speaks to historical memory in Russia, which is Nazism. You cannot have that in any society, actually, but especially in the place. Because remember, after 1949, I think it was, it's 1943 or 4 class of Russia, only 1% of all men came back home. Everyone died in the battlefield. So imagine your high school class, only 1 kid out of 100. So if you had 3 schools, only 1 kid out of 3 schools. That's what happened in Russia. So the historical memory of Nazi Germany is incredibly deep in Russia. The only thing I can compare it to for South Africa is it's the memory of the Anglo-Boer War to the Afrikaners. It's still this very day. It's throughout the society, right? It is something similar to the Mafekani of Shaka. You still speak of it. You know those things, right? They had an impact, whatever. It's history, but it still has an historical impact. But that's more recent in Russia. So you're playing with fire here. And we need to get the fires down.
Lost you there for a second. My bad. As we begin to taper off our conversation in the last sort of 6 minutes or so, Hugo, I think it's important for us to have that conversation around the rest of the world. Those of us here right now, you and me, are adamant that there must be peace. And I'll echo your sentiments begrudgingly that yes, Ramaphosa is actually doing the right thing in seeking peace in that region. And indeed those African countries that went there and said, hey man, you guys need to sort this out because it's having a very negative effect on the rest of the world. And it's raising those tensions, if you will, as you rightly pointed out. The pathway to peace, therefore, is the conversation we need to have. And I must say this before I forget the point. That video clip that I played of Putin's comments around that there actually was a proposed peace plan that had 18 articles in it. They were prepared to sign it, blah, blah, blah. That part of this conversation is actually not being amplified if you do a search, for example, on the corporate media. That concerns me at the moment. The narratives being spun around this conflict. Are we seeing a confluence of media, governments around the world, influential personalities, actually pushing for the peace pipe between these two countries? Or are we seeing a geopolitics that plays out that seeks to have these two sides entrench themselves, whether it's arming the Ukrainians, who, by the way, they do need the arms, as to whether you believe they should be armed by the West or not, is not what I'm saying here. And of course, the Russian side, which says, hey, we're open to peace, but on certain conditions. Talk to us about those 2 points. Number one, the Ukrainian side and its support from the West, is it pro-peace? And of course, the Russian side and its demands for peace. Can you unpack that for us in the final
Well,
comment.
I would say there's a bit more to that. It's not just two sides. There's a third side as well. So the first one you're right is the political waste, if you can will. This is basically the former British Empire, most of Europe, America, all of those, part of South Africa, not all of it. Cape Town maybe. So it's historical, cultural links to the West, if you will, tend to be the ones for upping ante at this stage. Their populations are like, the Russians did everything, Russians, and the populations are the most propagandized. Unfortunate to say so. Then I would say the Russian side, yes, there is an ugly side in Russia. It's like, we will negotiate on no terms. You said so many times NATO won't expand. You said so many times this and that. So that is happening as well. How many friends Russia in the world has is a very difficult question to answer. I'm not sure if all of these countries are friends. So I wrote an article with Joel Kotkin, and we titled it The New Great Game, and we wrote an article, we mentioned the article, what they call strategic non-alignment. So I think many countries in Africa and in India and Asia are saying they're going to basically go with India's policy has always been, which is Nero's policy of we stay out of major geopolitical conflicts because we are so dependent on all countries, and we neutralize them. We try and neutralize the threats. And I think the African leaders have learned from the Indians, because remember, in South Africa, we're a country of a variety of cultures and peoples and things. If we are historically, whenever South Africa chose a great power, the government of the day collapsed. Okay, so when during the British Empire they were dragged into the Second World War, the Afrikaners said, we're not going to fight for the former colonial empire. Many said that, and what happened then? We had the Afrikaner nationalism came to rise. What happened when the Afrikaners were too geopolitically dependent on the Americans? The Americans turned their back on South Africa. Very quickly, the politics changed, and it was the end of the apartheid regime. Okay. So if we are going to be seen, or if we are going to choose Russia over America and whatever, we are playing with fire here. And I hope that I would want to wish our media just gets this message straight. Ramaphosa, as far as I can tell from his statements, okay, I haven't spoken to him on a meeting, I don't represent the ANC, has not chosen a side yet. Okay, South Africa has stayed as neutral as possible. Sometimes we can be a little bit more diplomatic in how we answer things, but our English press in South Africa desperately wants to portray South Africa as if we are in favor of Russia for this war. That's complete and utter nonsense. What we want is to end the conflict so there can be peace, because that's the breadbasket of Europe. And those, whatever supply chains come out of Russia, the minerals, the integration to the world economy is extraordinary. We want those things to open up so that people can be fed. That is what our interest is in, okay? And yes, you would like to see, international law applied and all these things. The problem is, let's face it, international law is never really applied for a great power, okay? It's a reality. If we are really going to enforce international law, then I would say that's fine. I'm willing to prosecute Putin at the Nuremberg trials or at the Hague, but then I want George Bush and Tony Blair there as well. Okay, for the unprovoked invasion of Iraq. That was actually unprovoked. For the bombing of Libya. I want, South Africans who were fighting, selling weapons to Yemen, where the Yemenis are living in starvation, to go be prosecuted. There's lots of crimes around the world that go unprosecuted. And I wish all of them would be prosecuted, okay, for all these crimes against humanity. But we need to weigh out our options and say, as soon as we can, whatever we need to do, compromise with the guys. Not all conflicts end the way you want to be. Both sides have to say we have to compromise and we can't get what we want. And then from there, we use that to slowly build peace. And peace is going to take generations there. Okay, because this is some of the... I can't explain. The best I can explain is if the Zulus in South Africa would attack the Xhosas. You're sort of family, but that type of thing. It'll be a devastating thing, and for the communities. And that is where those people are at the moment. So we need to do whatever we can to try and help them. And it's not going to be an easy process going forward.
Hugo, we have completely run out of time. And again, I think the points you're making are very important ones. Just as before I let Hugo go, guys, I must quickly say this. I do not care. Hugo and I'll speak on behalf of Hugo too. No one cares here what side you are on, whether you're pro-Russia or you're pro-Ukraine. No one cares here. We're just having a conversation around the current events that we've seen, situating it rather in its historical context, and basically saying, what will the pathway to peace look like? That is the conversation that I think I'm more interested in. No one wants to see war.
Can I make one proposal? Okay, one proposal, South Africa.
Sure, just very briefly, Hugo.
Okay, South Africa needs power, electricity. We all know that. We need nuclear power, base load capacity. I'm saying that now. Okay, we can promise Russia a nuclear power station and America one. We say, you guys both build us one if you guys go and find that. That's how we do it. We send 2 RFIs out tomorrow and say it's a gift for you guys. Okay, we built the first 2 of the other countries. It's a gift for you guys if that war ends tomorrow. You start talking to each other.
Hugo,
that's how we should do it.
I'm gonna have us end this, and I'm gonna have us end it there. That last point Hugo's making is very cheeky because he knows that this Sunday on Liberty and Friends at 8 p.m.
You're still there. That's ESCOM, right? Huh.
Okay.
I still hear you, Sigley. We are still live. We are still live.
Load shedding.
Okay, so this is a very good ad for why we need nuclear power.
Perhaps on that note, on that bombshell, let me end tonight's show. Thank you very much for watching. I know you guys can hear me, even if you can't see me. Hugo, I'm going to give you an answer just to punt, for you to punt your show, please. How do the people get in touch with you if you want to be reached?
So I have a YouTube channel. It's Hugo Kruger, actually with the 2 dots. It's on YouTube. You can search my name. And I am talking a lot about developmental economics, electricity, things of that sort to solve these bigger conflicts, geopolitics, anything of that nature. Thank you very much, Sigley.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That is Hugo Kruger, of course, who you can catch on his content. Make sure you do exactly that, folks. Thank you so much for watching this broadcast. I'll see you again for the daily Vuga Nazo show. Apologies for not seeing me. It is load shedding or rolling blackouts here in South Africa. Do yourself and me, please, a favor on your way out by hitting that like button. That's right. Hit that like button right now, whether you're watching this simulcast on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. And guys, don't forget, if it is on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Come on, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. Help me reach my goal of 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And of course, find us at our website at bigdaddyliberty.com. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. And as I always say at the end of every show, never trust a commie.